Yeah, I was just gonna say, it's a lot in this one. Where to go?
I have to confess that I looked back. I couldn't remember if I taught this portion last year or not, but I looked back through my notes and I was like, maybe I taught last year, and I can use my notes from that, and I don't have to like work so hard.
Work something else up.
maybe I have notes that'll remind me of, how I wanted to look at this from last year, because it's a tough portion and there's a lot in it, and there's a lot going on this week.
Yes.
And what? And
Did you do it last year?
I did not.
Okay.
I gave a Drosh on this portion last year,
Oh.
but
Well,
it did. So we could have had a 5-minute Torah study. I could have just come in and given my Drosh from last year.
Come late.
We could have just, had coffee and cider and talked, but I didn't. So anyway, but this is a difficult portion, because this, of course, is the portion where we have like this ruling of no one in this generation gets to enter the land, which is sad and challenging. But also shows, I don't know, I kind of like some of the things that it shows us about the Lord. So we'll see if we'll get there. And then of course we have at the end, I don't know if we'll get to it to talk about too much, but Numbers 15 we get to the end of the portion kind of switches gears to talking about some of these offerings, and then it talks about unintentional sin, and then the tzitzit, and so it shifts gears quite dramatically there at the end. So I don't know if we'll have enough time to really get into all of that, but we'll see, because 13 and 14 are pretty solid. Okay, so 13. I want us to start to slow down kind of in about the middle of 13. So 13 starts out, of course, that Adonai tells Moses to send some men in to investigate the land of Canaan, which is Israel, the promised land, of course. They're to send representatives from each tribe into the land to kind of scout it out and see what's going on there, to see what the produce is like, to see what the people are like, to see, to gather all this information. Moses, of course, gives some really specific kind of instructions about things that he wants them to notice when they go in, what he wants them to report on when they come back. In verse 17 of chapter 13, Moses is saying to them, says, as he sent them into the land of Canaan, he said to them, go up there through the Negev, then go up into the hill country, see what the land is like and the people living there, whether they might be strong or weak, few or many, in what kind of land are they living, is it good or bad? Also, what about the cities in which they are living? Are they walled, or do they have fortifications? How is the soil, fertile or poor? Are there trees on it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land, because it was the season for the first ripe grapes. So he really wants them to get this detailed information about the land and the people there. And of course, this is all set in motion by God himself. I think it's important for us to remember that, because of course we have some tension in what follows, but God is wanting them to go and see what's there. And obviously he knows what they're going to find, and so we'll kind of continue to look at that as we go through the next several sections here. But yeah, so they're going to go figure out what the situation really is. Of course, knowing that God has promised them this land, that God has, that Moses keeps describing it as this land flowing with milk and honey. So it's been kind of set up as a positive, good place, right?
Right.
Okay, so we know what Moses' instructions are. So then let's look at 26 through, we're going to kind of break this down in sections because I want us to like look and see how this progresses because I think this is really interesting. Okay, so verse 26, they traveled and returned to Moses. They returned to Moses, Aaron, and the entire community of Bnei Israel at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran. They gave their report to them and the entire assembly, and they showed the land's fruit. They gave their account to him and said, "We went into the land where you sent us. Indeed, it is flowing with milk and honey. This is some of its fruit. Except the people living in the land are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the sons of Anak there. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites are living in the mountains, and the Canaanites are living near the sea along the banks of the Jordan." Okay, let's pause. So we have two kind of categories of what they're reporting on, right? We have the land and the people. Okay, so what do they say about the land?
Beautiful.
It's beautiful. The report about the land is great, right?
Everything God said.
Yeah, it's everything. Yeah, it's land flowing with milk and honey. Look at this fruit we brought. It's wonderful. Like, the land itself is great. Okay. And then what about the people?
Big and scary.
Big and scary. Yes, the sons of Anak are kind of thought to be like these giants. Some connect them with the Nephilim, which are the giants that we heard of earlier. Some say they're different. The point is, they're big and scary. And also, there's lots of different people groups, right? It's not just there's one group of people, one nation here already that we need to worry about. It's all of these different tribes or peoples living in the different parts of the land. And depending on how much you know about the land of Israel, because it's even when it talks about them going up, they go up through the Negev, so they go up through the desert in the south. So of course that's probably pretty barren and rocky and whatever. But then as you go north, everything gets more and more luscious and green, and you get up towards the Galilee and up in the north of Israel, and it's just everything is green and beautiful and wonderful. And so they're kind of experiencing all of that. They're experiencing different terrain, the parts of the mountains, and Israel is a really interesting place. Like there's so much in such a small space, such a variety of land. And so, and the thing about that is there's a lot of places kind of like what they're saying is, so they have, Amalek is living in the Negev, so they have these people groups living down in the desert, and then they have people living up in the mountains and people living near the sea. So there's lots of places for people to kind of settle and live and protect themselves, really. So that creates a challenge. If they're to go into the land and take the land, they have to overcome not just one group of people, and once they kind of take down the leader, then they can kind of rule and reign. They have to kind of go through, which as we see later is exactly what happens. But at this point, I think they're kind of insinuating that they're a little bit overwhelmed by the people and the multitude of nations, I guess, living in the land. Okay. So that's their initial account. So then Caleb speaks up. So verse 30, and Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "We should definitely go up and capture the land, for we can certainly do it." Okay. So Caleb, is he denying anything that they've just said? No. I think he's not countering that. He's agreeing, yes, the land is good, and yeah, there's all these people, but we can do this. And so it's interesting that Caleb is the one that speaks up for a variety of reasons. But what does this even point out that what does this show you about Caleb? And I think we could, we know later that Caleb and Joshua are very much in unity with each other, but Caleb is just the one who's speaking here. what does that show you about Caleb as we look toward what's coming and how we know they're going to lead?
His faith is strong.
Yeah.
He has no doubt that Adonai is with them and we can do this.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Looking to God.
What? I'm sorry.
Looking to God and not the circumstances.
Yeah.
right.
It also just makes me wonder if his personality type wasn't more of one of those half full rather than half empty
Sure.
personality types too.
Right. Yeah. Which is a good thing to have
Optimistic, yeah.
in a leader that is,
Uh-huh.
when you have this big task ahead of you. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that he, it makes me think of I don't know. I kind of sometimes I wish we had more information about Caleb. It's one of those things we don't know a lot about him specifically, but there's this sense that he's grown up. He's lived through all of this, and it seems like what has been instilled in him is that God is faithful. Like God says that he's going to do what he says. And so I wonder what his relationship with Moses was like, even. Because he's watched Moses go before the Lord and come back with this instruction, and then seen everything play out. And it seems like because, he's speaking up and making this statement that he is confident that God will continue to keep his word, which is pretty great.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So, in your study on the group, the 12 that were assigned to go, and I know they were princes from each tribe, or leaders or whatever, would those have been basically designated, do you think, based off of birthright, or do you think those were designated by the people? Because it makes you wonder about, who picked those 12?
Right.
Because it does, I know the Lord tells Moses to send him, but I'm
Yes.
just wondering the assigning of who it was to represent each tribe, where that would have, how you come about picking who goes to represent your tribe.
Right. And we don't. The simple answer is we don't know.
Okay.
Some of the speculation is, and I was trying to see, and I didn't write down the reference. I should have guessed that you would ask me that question. No, you're fine.
I was just curious, because
Yeah.
you sit there and you think you've got 2 out of 12 that are positive towards
Right.
what the Lord wants to accomplish, and I'm sitting there thinking, did this even, and did it even surprise God that some of them would come back? Nothing, of course, surprises God, but I'm just saying.
Right.
Personality-wise.
I doubt if they had the capacity or inclination to do character studies of everybody before they made
Right.
the choice.
Mhm.
So I'm guessing that it was based on family status.
Yeah, that's what I just wondered,
Yeah.
if princes were basically a birthright thing.
Probably in some capacity, yes. I don't know exactly how that worked. It does seem that. So back in number 7, when they're bringing the offerings, it's designated who brings those, and these people are different. So it's hard to say exactly what that means, but I think that it definitely means there's definitely probably a birthright component to it. But they're not necessarily, because it does say they're princes of the tribe. I don't read that to necessarily mean it's like that they're the head of their tribe, but they're part of leadership. They're probably firstborns. They're probably related, closely to the line of directly into. I don't know. It's hard to say. We don't have the genealogy. These people aren't mentioned elsewhere. They are different from the people who bring the offerings. Back in, like I said, back in number 7, and so basically all we can kind of surmise from that is that they're in some kind of role of leadership. Based on what we know about ancient culture, it probably does have to do with birthright.
Mhm.
But beyond that, anything would be speculation. So, but I don't know that, so yeah, my guess is that there's some kind of order to how that they are, chosen.
I do think it's cool that Caleb was from the tribe of Judah.
Yeah.
I mean, that just once again shows that, doing what was right for the Lord, like we see all the way back from
Yeah.
Judah, where that seems to be, from that tribe, more of a tendency to stand with what God's promises
Mhm.
than to go off into a fleshly realm. And
Right, and there's something about too, and it's kind of like, you know, Tom did teaching sometime in the past, a couple of years ago maybe, about the, you know, the Judah first principle. Because of course Judah is where we get the term Jew.
Mhm.
And of course we know all these things, you know, the kings come from the line of Judah, David was part of the tribe of Judah, Yeshua, you know, like, we know all of these things. So obviously it becomes very kind of important, and Judah ends up taking on this kind of firstborn role, even though technically Judah was not the firstborn and all of that, but you look back through in Genesis, you kind of get the history of how that happens. But yeah, Caleb is part of the tribe of Judah, which is also interesting because I don't know if I really want to go here because I'm not going to be able to line it out for you. I have to go back and like refresh my memory on all the how you find this.
Go there.
Go there. Tease you a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm not going to be able to defend this fully because I would have to go back and like remember exactly where all the verses are and the details. But Caleb is a Gentile of sorts. Actually, there's a verse that says that he's kind of one of these that's kind of brought in. He's one of these. He is part of the tribe of Judah, but how his family his yep. See, I'm gonna get it wrong, but it's like the Canaanites back in there. It talks about like he's from that tribe, which is basically one of the tribes that comes from Ishmael.
Mhm.
So still in the family, but not. See, this is a really bad explanation because my brain is like trying to piece together all the things that I'm supposed to know about this. But it is this, so really Joshua and Caleb are kind of, some people like to point to this as a little bit of a Jew-Gentile unity. I think that's, to call Caleb fully Gentile is also not fair. But he is one of these that has been brought into the family. Which is interesting that's how God would work as well. And I should look up the history of that so I can give you a better description. Tom has taught on it before and he does a much better job of it. But anyway. So that's another thing about Caleb that's really interesting, and that even his role of leadership that he ends up taking on.
So can that be an email sent out?
Be what?
Can that be an email sent out?
It can be something. I'll work on it. Yes.
Does it link, because I read this in Ezekiel and it kind of confused me, in Ezekiel 16, where it talks about, confront Jerusalem with her abominations and say, thus say Adonai, your origin and your birth are from the land of Canaanite. Your father was an Amorite and your mother was a Hittite. Is that going back to
What verse are you in?
chapter 16, where it talks about that origin thing? Does that have anything to tie in with that? Or is that more an Abraham origin thing? Or we can just skip it. It's just something.
Yeah, I
that's
don't
kind of-
know. I don't
Okay.
wanna, I don't
Don't
know.
wanna go there?
I don't,
Okay.
yeah. I can't comment. I can't comment without looking in a little bit more deeper into that, and we'll get way off in the weeds if we keep going that way. But anyway, so coming back to Numbers 13. Caleb is speaking, and he's showing this allegiance to God and saying that yes, we can surely capture this land. So, okay, so Caleb makes this declaration, and then let's look at verses 31 through the end of the chapter here. Yeah.
Could interject,
Mhm.
just, I don't think the other 10, there were 12 total, right? I don't think the other 10 were really out of line. I don't think they were doing what they're sent out to do, fulfilling their responsibility, telling them the truth as they saw it. I don't think it was until verse 31 that they crossed the line.
I agree, because in this first section, they're doing what Moses asked them to do. They're reporting on what was there, and they're not making. The other 10, it seems, are not making they're not making a recommendation. They're not making they're not giving an opinion of what should be done. They're just reporting information.
Right.
But then Caleb speaks up and says, yes, basically saying, yes, but let's go. And that then triggers the response that we're going to look at here in 31. So, but the men who had gone up with him said, we cannot attack these people because they are stronger than we. They spread among Bnei Israel a bad report about the land which they explored, saying, the land through which we passed to explore devours its residents. All the people we saw there are men of great size. We also saw there the Nephilim. The sons of Anak are from the Nephilim. And we seemed like grasshoppers in our eyes as well as theirs. Okay. So, this is something that of course happens. I don't know, I mean this is like one of those, like, these people are very human. Because they've come back and they've brought this report and they're like, the land is great, the people are scary. And then Caleb makes this declaration, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, we can't do this. And then it's like everything's bad, right? It pushes them, Caleb's exhortation to go forward basically polarizes the rest of them off to say, no, this is bad. This is all bad. And saying they're spreading a bad report about the land. And what's interesting here is that, now they're saying that the land devours its residents. So let's talk about that for a second. What does that mean, and how does that? Is that different than what they were saying before about when they're talking about how good the land is, or is this? Are they saying something different here, or what is that? What is that land devours its residents? What is that about? So,
Well, it seems like this report is just coming from their fear.
yeah.
And we don't know for sure, but they probably didn't see the people devoured.
And it says the land we passed through to explore is
Yeah.
one that devours its inhabitants. So maybe like just they were trying to find the negative in it, and they're like, all this land between here and there is really bad. And then once you get there, it's fortified and got real big people. So, but they were picking out all the negative things about it and saying all that land was, that land wasn't good. I mean, I know that land over there has grapes, but
Right.
this one doesn't. So
Yeah.
definitely shouldn't go.
So think about the geography of Israel again for a second. Think about where Israel is. What's around Israel? So that there's water, but what else? Like what's north, east, and south of Israel? Desert, enemies. Think about think about modern Israel. What's their reality?
Yeah.
They have nuclear missiles pointed at them from all directions all the time. right? We've listened to the reports of the rockets. We know, the brilliance of Israeli military defense and Iron Dome and all these things, because that's how, they have to have them. Necessity is the mother of invention, right? Like, so what's interesting is, based on what we know of the ancient world, the situation was very much the same. So we've already talked about there's all these people living in the land. So basically what's happening here is in the areas surrounding the land itself, there's obviously even more people groups, This is what we talk about, like, this is the challenge of Israel. It's like God, like, this is the inheritance of God's people. But it's also like God, it would have been nice if God would have like put a fence around it and been like, I'm just gonna save this for you. Just gonna keep everybody out and you're gonna go there eventually. We're just gonna set it aside. That's not what happened. There's always people living there. And that's why we have a lot of the controversy that's existing now, is people are like, we have history on this land. And it's true. There are other groups of people who have history on that same piece of land. And that's why that situation is very complicated. And so it's happening here too. So there's all these people who are living in this land. They're like, we're here. This is our land. The Israelites haven't lived there in 400 years. So it's like, who are you to come in and think that this is yours? Not to mention all the people around it. And so now just like focus in on Israel itself. There's, how many groups of people? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, several. At least 5 or 6, 7, whatever.
Isn't it 7?
Listed here, it looks like there's like 5, but there's
Somewhere
other
there.
lists that there
Yeah.
are more. So
Somewhere in the top taught about there being 7.
yeah, still several in a small space, small
Right.
piece of land. So, do you think that they're all just living really harmoniously together? No, there's lots of infighting. So the people who are living there are constantly fighting with each other. So part of what they're seeing is like, okay, if we go up, we're just going to be in the middle of this constant war. So this idea of the land devouring its inhabitants is like, there's a lot of fighting going on. There's going to be constant bloodshed, constant war, constant battle, constant controversy, constant, all of this. So they're like, and this is still, Israel, the estimates are that the number of people who came out of Egypt were potentially up to 2 million people. But still, like, I don't know, so it depends on how you want to look at it, if you want to look at that as large or small, but still, it's like, this is a group of people who doesn't have, generations of military training. They've been in slavery. So I'm in their situation and thinking, that is pretty intimidating. To think that you're walking, like, there's this land that God has promised you, but all you can see and what you know and what the natural is showing you is that you're just walking into a fight. You're walking into a lifetime of war after just having been delivered. That's tough. I'm not saying that they shouldn't rely on the Lord. They've just seen, they've been delivered. I don't remember the timeline right now. I think we're 2 years into the wilderness, maybe. At least over a year. But still, relatively recent history, being delivered out of Egypt, seeing the sea split, seeing God, as the cloud move behind them to shine light on the Israelites and darkness on the Egyptians, drowning the Egyptians in the sea, overtaking. They've just lived through that. So of course we want them to have this big faith that says, if God says we can take this land, we can take this land, which is what Caleb is personifying. But at the same time, it's like, the reality that they can see is difficult. So yes. So I'm not condoning that they shouldn't be, that their behavior. I'm just saying, in the natural, it kind of makes sense.
Do you think that even through the captivity in Egypt. They knew who they were, but do you really think they had a national identity at that point?
That's a good question.
I think that would have a very significant effect on their attitude of what they
Yeah.
did.
So I would say yes and no. I would say in the sense that I don't know if I would call it a national identity. They had some kind of group identity because they are the other.
Well, they knew who they were, yeah.
And so they know that they're the Israelites or the people of God, or however it talks about them, that are enslaved by the Egyptians. But as far as a national identity, I don't know that they had that developed idea that they're actually a nation. Like there's this promise that's kind of, but after 400 years, it's kind of like, what does that really mean? They're not personally probably identifying with,
Right.
We are this people of God, we're going to go and take this land that's been promised to us. It's like, yeah, generations ago, Father Abraham, who had many sons, sorry, I couldn't help it. Bad Sunday school joke. Way back when, God appeared to this guy and said that this is going to happen, but we have no idea what that means. We've never been to this land. We don't know who's going to lead us. We don't, So as far as a national identity, I don't know that was fully developed. I think that that's what ultimately God ends up doing in the wilderness. And of course, we're seeing this transition over the course of their slavery in Egypt, and then into the deliverance in the wilderness season is the transition from this family, just this one family unit that is, kind of God's chosen to a multitude, to a nation that is God's chosen people. So we've seen a great expansion in what it means to be the people of God over this time. So I think that they're trying to metabolize and understand what that means and see how that reality plays out. And so I think that that's what God is ultimately works on in this. And I might suggest, because again, they went and looked at the land and found all of this out because God said they should. They weren't just like, oh, we're gonna go and check this out. God said we're going there. God said it's time to go and spy out this land. So he wants them to know this, which I think is a piece of that national identity, of saying like, look, you're seeing, like, this is what I've called you to take on. And so they're faltering a little bit here, but I think that in some ways that's understandable.
Yes.
But I think that that's part of the goal of God saying, look, I've created you to be able to inhabit this land, which involves conquering the people there, which involves being able to cultivate the land, which involves being able to defend it and all of these things, which requires a national identity.
Yeah.
So I think at this point he's calling them into that, but I don't know that it's fully developed. Yes?
I feel like maybe it's important, but he said, first of all, it's already been said that he told them to go, and Adonai told them to go investigate the land which he's giving them. So he's already told them, I'm giving it to you. And then he's sending the princes from every tribe. And so I feel like it's important that he, for a reason, is sending the princes of the head of each tribe. They're supposed to, if anyone's going to obey, you think they would be the ones to listen to what God said and follow through, and not come back and just explore and what he told to do, find out what the land's like, because this is the land I'm giving you, like you say. So he didn't tell them, find out whether or not you think we can go in there.
Right.
I didn't ask for your opinion, I'm asking you to go explore, and I already said I'm giving you the land. So the princes of every tribe, I mean, I guess it's a test, or he just automatically assumes, like, when God gives us something to do, he doesn't expect us to question everything. Oh no, that's like my nature. I know it's our nature, I guess, to question it, but it's like, I feel like for a reason, why would all the princes except 2 come back with a bad report? It's really not a great It is a national picture, I mean, from each tribe, they have identity in their tribes, but, I mean, that's a, I guess, identity picture, but I mean, when you read it again, you're like, you know what, God didn't ask you to question whether or not we could go in. We never asked him to question that.
Mhm.
So, I kind of see like the Lord having them go look at this land. So, this is people that have grumbled and complained, we have nothing but manna, you wanted the pheasants, so here, choke on them, you know, I mean,
Right.
gone through, you know, so they're complaining about where they're at, there's not enough water, I mean, we've been through all this, and the Lord scopes us out, look, milk, honey, grapes, pomegranates, figs, it's a fertile land, you haven't liked what you've had here, I am taking you to some place that is not a desert wasteland.
Right.
And so, you know, my thought was this was kind of like God showing them a taste of, you are gonna come out of this wilderness where you're complaining about the food and water, and you're gonna go into a place where there's great stuff to eat, there's an abundance of things, yeah, there's giants in the land, but there's still this great abundance.
Mhm.
So I felt like when I read it, and the Lord having them go look at this, it was like to give a hope
Mhm.
that you're gonna come out and you're actually gonna inherit someplace that's already fertile.
Mhm.
I said you could do it, I didn't say you wouldn't have to fight for it.
Yes.
Right. And what's interesting about what you're saying, Lori, is that later on somewhere in Deuteronomy and then in Joshua as they go, what we learn is that the fact that the land has been cultivated by these other groups of people is to Israel's benefit.
Mm.
Because they have food when they get there.
Right.
You know, they're actually not starting from scratch.
Mhm.
And so it actually ends up being a blessing. So a couple of things based on what both of you were saying. So yes, there's leadership. These princes that are going in, they're definitely leaders among the tribes. And so yes, it is interesting that it's like, you might expect them to hold to, I don't know, the allegiance to God, but also they are also feeling responsible for their people. So part of what they're going in, they're seeing all these people and seeing the fight ahead of them. They're like, I would suggest maybe they're feeling protective of their people. They don't want to lose their people in this fight. And also, I think an important piece here, which even comes back to we can think about how Caleb's response plays into this too, is that the instruction was to go on a fact-finding mission, right?
Mhm.
They were not asked to give their opinion. Caleb was not asked either. So which is interesting. So it's like let's think back to if this had gone a different way. Obviously, we know how it went, but let's imagine for a second they came back and they gave this first report before Caleb speaks, and then they stopped. In that situation, based on previous situations and in the past history, what likely would have happened was Moses would have gone and inquired of the Lord. And the Lord would have given instruction of go and fight or do this in preparation or whatever. Instead, Caleb kind of jumps the gun a little bit and gives this unsolicited opinion of like, we need to go. Which that's not what God said when he said to send people in the land. It's like, it wasn't go send people into the land so that you can gear up for battle right now. It was go and see what's there. And then it's like, you know, God likes to give instruction and likes to give direction at the time that it's needed. He doesn't tend to lay out the whole plan for you. And so it's interesting that they've kind of now taken it upon themselves, Caleb included, to offer their opinion and suggestion of what they should do. Of course, Caleb seems to be operating under this spirit of faith in the Lord, which is triggering the fear in everybody else. So we're seeing this polarization happening, which is a very human type of response.
Yeah.
And so we can relate to that for sure. But it was like, but sometimes I read this, I'm thinking like, but what would have happened if they would have just said, these are the facts, this is what we saw, and then stopped and waited on the Lord? We might have had a very different story.
Mhm.
But God, through his, God works with humans. He works through our humanity. For better or for worse, So now that they've offered their opinions, and there's this division, then we have to see the rest of the story play out. So let's keep going for a second. So this kind of triggers the next round of grumbling and complaining, right? All through the night, chapter 14, all through the night the entire community raised up their voices, all the people wept, all Bnei Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. And here's again their response that is like so frustrating. If only we had died in Egypt, if only we had died in the wilderness. Why is Adonai bringing us to this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our children will be like plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt? And they say to each other, let's choose a leader and let's go back to Egypt. Okay. So think about, let's think bigger picture for a second. Think back to like when Moses was born. What was the decree that had come out from in Egypt?
Kill the male children.
Kill all the male children. Right? That's why Moses is hid in the basket. Okay, so think about this. Say that had all played out, that we hadn't had these courageous midwives who allowed all these babies to be born, including Moses. All the male children are dead. What does that mean about Israel? Eventually all the adult males are going to die. So then who's left?
The women.
Women. What happens to women who are enslaved?
Nothing good.
Nothing good. So isn't it interesting that they're worried about their women and children being taken advantage of when that's exactly the situation that was being set up in Egypt? Isn't that interesting? This whole, we've talked about this a lot, like this whole deliverance program, this whole way that God leads Israel is about life, right? So, one, it's interesting, Israel hasn't quite gotten that yet. Because their fear is of death, right? They're afraid to die when they go into the land, which in some sense is valid. But they're forgetting the Egyptian culture of death. And even the fact that they were spared because of the blood of the lamb on their doorposts as the deliverance, that last plague was the death of the firstborn. And that we talked about this, the redemption of the firstborn principle that we have in even some of these offerings and things like that. And so isn't it so interesting that they're trying to go back to that?
Selective memory is very human too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when you think of the whole terms on how they left, and then they get to the Red Sea, and they're gonna get wiped out. Pharaoh comes after them, it's like, what even makes them think that Egypt would take them back?
Right.
They didn't leave on any kind of high note whatsoever as far as Egypt's concerned. Why would Egypt even want these people back when they have a God that does what he does to the Egyptians?
Yes. And we don't know, like you're saying, selective memory.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what the selective memory of Egypt is. Because remember when they leave, the Egyptians are like, please go. They're giving up their wealth. They're giving them gold and silver and things and saying, please go.
Mm-hmm.
We do not want you here. Your God is bringing terror on us. Get out. Of course, it shifts and they chase, we know the whole thing. But there is this idea of you need to leave. So we don't know if that's what the Egyptians are remembering, or if they're saying, oh, if you're trying to come back, that means your God is small, and they probably would be met with a slaughter. So we don't know exactly which narrative is largest in the Egyptian mindset either. But yeah, it's really interesting that they're wanting to go back to this, and it's like, yeah, it's the selective memory of like, and it's this idea of like a bird that's grown up in a cage. You open the door and they stay in a cage because that's what they know. Freedom is scary.
Responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and it's just unknown. Like they don't, like we're saying, these people don't know how to function as a nation. They only know how to function in captivity. Yeah. So they're in a tough spot. Okay, so let's keep going because I want us to get at least through to see like Adonai's response and talk about some of this and not just be stuck in this, the weight of this grumbling and complaining. So, okay. So Moses and Aaron respond as they usually do by falling on their faces. And so what's interesting here, and we're looking in Numbers 14:5 and 6 and on. So in verse 6, Joshua son of Nun and Caleb son of Jephunneh were among those who had explored the land and they tore their clothes. And they said, so Joshua and Caleb are now addressing Israel. The land through which we passed is an exceptionally good land. If Adonai is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land and give it to us, a land flowing with milk and honey. Only don't rebel against Adonai, and don't be afraid of the people in the land. They will be food for us. The protection over them is gone. Adonai is with us. Do not fear them. Okay. Think back to Leviticus for a second. I know you thought we were done, but we're not. Think back to the end of Leviticus. Leviticus 26 talks about the blessings of the faithful and the curses, or the consequences, whichever way you want to look at it, of the unfaithful. So as I read this, that's what I'm thinking about. So let's flip back for a second. So Leviticus 26. So like basically 3 through 13, where it talks about this faithfulness. I'll read some of the highlights. If you walk in my statutes, keep my mitzvot, and carry them out, then I will give you rains in their seasons, the land will yield its crops, and the trees of the field will yield their fruit. So they're seeing that that's what's happening, right? So they're probably good with that. Verse 6, I will bring shalom in the land, and you will lie down with no one making you afraid. I will remove dangerous beasts from the land, and no sword will pass through your land. You will chase your enemies, and they will fall by the sword. 5 of you will chase 100, and 100 of you will chase 10,000, and your enemies will fall by the sword before you. I will in turn make you fruitful and multiply you. I will confirm my covenant with you. You will eat the old harvest and clear out the old because of the new. I will set my tabernacle among you, and my soul will not abhor you. I will walk among you, and I will be your God, and you will be my people. I am Adonai your God, who brought you forth out of the land of Egypt, so that you would not be their slaves. And I have broken the bars of your yoke and made you walk upright. So this matches pretty well with what Caleb's saying, what Caleb and Joshua are saying, right? So they heard this. Message received, it seems. So it's this interesting, right? It's this interesting tension of like they're looking at the land and they're seeing we're gonna die, these people are gonna overtake us, they're more numerous than us, all of these things. But what God has said is like, it doesn't matter. They're gonna fall before you, and in turn, I'm gonna make you fruitful and multiply you. I'm actually going to increase you, not decrease you.
Right.
So Caleb and Joshua have understood this about God, have understood this backwards math that God likes to do. And it's everyone else who is struggling, it seems. But yes, Laura?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Because all along I've been thinking that God was, not that he automatically always sets people up, but he's been testing them, and I feel like he had to sift them out. And not that, I mean, he was gonna have them look at the land anyway to show him what he's giving them, but, like you say, you brought out this point about, he's already told them what he's gonna do with them and among them. He's gonna tabernacle with them. This is like it's a new people with a new covenant, and can't go into the land and trust in God if you're not going to trust what he's already told you, and they've already been grumbling along the way. And so he's sifting them out, and the leaders of each group, except for two, and then it says in Hebrews, except for Joshua and Caleb, I forgot which one he mentions first, because there's a different spirit in him. So he can't be walking, he says, like the Hebrews passage, he says, but the word that they heard did not help them because they were not unified with those who listened in faith. So that was like the key scripture, I felt like in Hebrews, like one of the key scriptures anyway, that the word that they all heard the same word.
Yeah.
But they weren't unified in faith with the ones who listened by faith. And there's only two of them out of all that. So it's like, I guess God had to sift them out, because at the end, after they grumbled and then they tried to go up anyway, God smoked the ones who brought back with a plague, the ones who brought back that report, they're gone. So it's like living proof, and they've already had living proof, I feel, of those who disobey, who grumble, who don't believe God, who aren't gonna walk. You can't tabernacle with people who aren't going to have faith in him or believe anything he says. It's like I'm taking you into this land, and you're gonna have to count on what I say, or you're not gonna be able to take it.
Yeah.
You're not gonna be able to dwell with me if you're unfaithful, even getting there. I guess that's what I feel like he's saying.
Yeah, because it's about relationship.
Right.
So relationships are built on trust, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and so I think
there's no
part of
trust
this
there.
is he's contextualizing, which Joshua and Caleb are trying to help them do. They're contextualizing what God has said about what happens with the faithful and how Adonai will be with them.
Yeah.
And will cause them to be able to overtake those that are far more numerous than them. But they have to have this trust relationship. And so what we're seeing is that there's people who are at different levels of maturity in this nation so far, which makes a lot of sense. And so in some sense, I think that part of the wilderness is, yes, it's a consequence, and we'll read about how that plays out in a minute, but see if I can find this verse really quick. Okay. So I think part of the wilderness is like what this is. So I think that this whole scenario is exposing this difference in maturity level, because like we saw in Leviticus 26, is that it requires them to keep the mitzvot and to keep the statutes and to be faithful for God to be able to dwell with them. It's this holiness piece. It's all of this, and so this situation with these spies is exposing that not everybody is there yet. And I do think I think there's an element to that probably grieves the heart of the Lord, and we'll see his response, and he does respond with some anger. But I also think it's the wilderness is like, because again, we're going to look at this in a second, because I think this is really important. This lack of faith at this point does not negate the promises he gave them, and it doesn't negate their role, and it doesn't negate their inheritance. And so really the wilderness is an opportunity to get everybody on the same page, and to get to that unity, to get to that place, until the point where, which it doesn't specifically say, but it makes me think about Joshua 1 for some reason. Like it talks about when they're, right when they're going to cross over, they go and they get all the people to prepare their provisions to go, and they all go together. And so by that point, they've sort of achieved more of that unity. Now there's always those that are not quite there, and there are consequences like that. Like the next part in Leviticus 26 is these are the consequences for the unfaithful, and like we see that play out through the rest of the Bible. Particularly the rest of the Tanakh, of like, hey, you're like, of God, basically the main narrative is God saying, you are my people, but you're not listening to me, and I've told you the consequences, and because I'm a faithful God, I have to carry out those consequences. Like he's actually not God. He's actually not the God of Israel and not the God of the whole universe if he doesn't carry out the negative consequences too.
Right.
Right.
And we really struggle with that. Like, how could a God punish his people like that? It's like, he told them. Like, it's a relationship, right? There's responsibility on both sides. And yes, the covenant cannot be broken because it's based on this foundational covenant of Abraham that cannot be broken by man. But the relationship still has to be two-sided. So, okay, let's
I have one
come
comment.
back here. Yeah.
And the verse, in Numbers 14, 9,
Mm-hmm.
part of it says the protection over them is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I read that, I'm like, well, how did they know that? And that's just such a faith statement based on, I love that you shared Leviticus 26, and that's how we're to be.
Yeah.
That we make statements that some people might think are crazy,
Mm-hmm.
but we do it based on the faith of what he's done in the past and what
Right.
he's said.
Right.
It's just huge
Mm-hmm.
to walk that way.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Because, yeah, I like what you're saying about that protection because they know that God has said that the people before them are going to fall. And so they have to, like, that has to be the case.
Right. It just, yeah.
Yeah.
God said
So-
it.
Yeah, God said it. Sounds so simple.
I know.
Okay. So let's keep going here. Okay. So at this point, of course, the people of Israel want to stone them. Which again, I think is a commentary on their fear. And then the second part of verse 10, the glory of Adonai appeared at the tent of meeting to all of Israel. Okay, so God himself, manifest presence, is getting involved now. So, yes. Okay. So when Adonai says to Moses, how long will these people treat me contemptibly? How long will they neglect to trust in me in spite of all the miraculous signs I have performed among them? I will strike them with a plague. I will destroy them. But I will make into a nation greater. But you I will make into a nation greater and stronger than they. Okay. This is really fascinating. Okay. So one, let me point out here, because we look at this and we read these stories and we're like, they've seen all these miracles, how can they not believe? But signs and wonders, yes, are tools and things that point you to the Lord, but they can't be the basis of your relationship with the Lord, right? So I'm just going to leave that there. Moses' response here is fascinating. Okay, so verse 13, Moses said to Adonai, the Egyptians will hear about it because you brought up this people by your power from among them. They will tell the residents of this land about it. Already they have heard that you, Adonai, are in the midst of this people, that you, Adonai, have been seen eye to eye, that your cloud remains over them, and that in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night you go before them. If you kill these people all at once, the nations who have heard this report about you will say, because Adonai was unable to bring this people to the land he promised them, he has slaughtered them in the wilderness. Okay. This is so good. So, God doesn't need to be reminded who he is. But Moses' response back to the Lord is like, look, this is who you are. This is your reputation among other people. If you kill all these people and start over, they're going to hear about that and they're not going to know that you're not actually God. Does God need to hear that?
No, and Moses even takes it one step further because then he continues on by quoting back to Moses, or Moses quotes back to God what God's identity statement that he gave to Moses in Exodus 34.
Exactly.
So, but I still think, to me what's so fascinating about Moses' response, the Lord had to show up because these people were going to kill Moses and Aaron, and I mean, they were going to kill him. And he's not even saying, hey God, I really like these people, so don't do this.
Right.
Instead, it's like, to me, it's like he was more concerned about the Lord's reputation than he was about this group of people that were ready to kill him.
Right.
Obviously, he doesn't need to hear that, but maybe he wanted to hear it.
Yes. Why?
Because that shows an understanding on Moses' part of who he is.
Exactly.
Wanting from it.
Exactly. And we do this, guys. Like when we, like some of like our, like think about some of the worship songs of declaring who God is. Yes, we are to worship him because he is God and he's holy. But a lot of what we're saying is for us. We need to remember, we need to declare who he is because we're the ones who are more likely to forget.
Well, I feel like also what's important, I'm sure they already see that, but it's so important what the people around see God doing, because if they're gonna go into the land, it can't be the God who gave up on his people. I mean, even if it's given to the children now, not the people who went to the wilderness, they're gonna see that, but they have to, you know, you can't go into a land with a God who can't, you know, or you, like I say, it's kind of like you can't go in anyway if he didn't get you in, but if there's no fear of God in anyone's eyes around, then there's no point in us going anywhere. If there's no fear of God in the
Right.
land. And so there has to be a fear of God in the land. And so if you don't follow through on what these people have seen who you are, in their eyes you have to be that God. Or, in other words, their gods can't do anything. They have to see that you're the God that can take your people through.
Right.
In other words, there has to be a fear of God in everyone's eyes.
Right.
That's kind of always key. Like, fear of
Exactly.
God.
Yeah, so listen to this. This is from Robert Alter. This is a commentary that I have he's a Jewish scholar. So he doesn't
Who?
believe Yeshua is the Messiah,
Who
but
is
he's
this?
Robert Alter.
Oh, okay.
But he has a translation and commentary that's pretty interesting. But this is what he says about this set of verses about Moses' response. He says, in the Exodus narrative, we are reminded again and again that the purpose of all the prodigious signs and wonders that God worked against Egypt was to make his uncontested supremacy known among all the nations. Were he now to destroy the Israelites, the effect would be to unravel the great skein of Exodus by encouraging the nations to question whether the Lord has any real power.
That's right.
So yeah, it goes along exactly what you're saying, is that, you know, God himself is saying, like, this is a demonstration to all the nations that God is the God of Israel and that he is the God of the whole world. He is actually the one true God. He's not, you know, bound to a particular land, because you had like territorial gods basically in a lot of ancient religion at the time. That he is the God. He moves with his people. He can be anywhere. He's anywhere that they are and on the whole earth. And so Moses is really defending this, and I think I'm glad you brought this out, Lori, too. It's in my notes too, that the next part of his response is to basically quote back parts of the 13 attributes from Exodus 34. You know, abundant, slow to anger, abundant in loving kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgression. Still, he does not leave the guilty unpunished. So Moses is not expecting that he lets everybody go scot-free. Like, he's not expecting, like, no consequence for this rebellion against him. But he's saying that his mercy and loving kindness are greater. Which is another part of the testimony and the reputation of God among the nations, is that he doesn't slaughter his people, because that's what other gods do.
Doesn't Moses know at this point that he's already been punished by, doesn't he already know, hasn't God already told him, you're not entering?
I don't think so, because in the next page talks about the water in the rock.
Yeah,
That's when it happens.
yeah, it's the water. So yeah, it's coming. But this is, I mean, yeah.
I like the fact that, like it said on here, he does tell him, I'm gonna forgive him, but forgiveness does not mean there isn't consequences.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And so I think a lot of people think, well, just because, you know, I forgive you, so therefore that wipes the slate clean. There's a difference still between forgiveness and the consequences to actions that you've already set in motion on.
Right,
things.
and a rebuilding of trust.
Yes.
Forgiveness doesn't automatically restore trust either.
True.
Children
So-
have a tough time with that one.
Huh?
Children have a tough
Yeah.
time with that one.
I love when he's forgiving and saying this, that within those verses, however, my servant Caleb. Because he is of a different spirit is with him. He is wholeheartedly behind me.
Right.
That's the key.
Yeah. Yeah, that different spirit in Caleb and in Joshua
Wholeheartedly.
is significant. But the one thing we need to wrap up here, but one thing I don't want you to miss too is that Moses is contending and pointing to this reputation of the Lord that he is not like the other gods. Because what would be expected of another god at this time is that your people are disobedient, you wipe them out, you punish them. And like we're saying, it's not that there are not consequences, and of course the other 10 spies, which we're not going to get a chance to get into, but God is going to take them out. But just those 10, not the whole nation. Not their whole families, not just them. So, but it's this principle of like, God doesn't replace his people, right? Which is like, that's the seed here. Like, this is what we need to anchor onto. If like, even in this situation where they're asking to go back to slavery, God does not replace his people. He doesn't choose a new one. He doesn't start a new line through Moses. He's like, these are my people. We're going to continue to work on this relationship, and we're going to keep moving forward, no matter how difficult it is. So, fast forward. God does not replace Israel. Israel remains his chosen people, even back to this point. Like, this is when he should have given up on them, and he did not.
Yeah.
So why would we think that he would give up on it now?
It makes you wonder that the teaching and the communication between the parents who were not going to go in the land and the children who were. Like, all of that dialogue, where's that? I don't know where that is, but
I know, right?
It makes you wonder how their parents had to communicate with how they failed and how now you are the only ones going in. Here's why. The whole communication of now you're the people who can go in, and you're who God has now. And but it's not us, because this is what we did. It's obviously they had to be taught, because isn't it the ones who are under 20 who are going in? So it's like all of that had to happen.
Yeah.
It's real life. Parents in real life make some mistakes, and they don't choose everything God had for them, and they don't take everything God had. But they want to teach their kids, look, I didn't get to see everything that God had for me because I made some choices along the way, and all the choices and all the ways we obey or didn't obey God. As parents, we have to do that in front of our own children. If we want them to go into the land that God has for them, we have to be honest and say, here's where I didn't walk with God, and here's why I'm not getting everything God had for me. Right. Ultimately, we'll all see it in heaven, but I'm just saying, imagine all of that had to transpire for the children to go in.
Yeah, it would be really interesting
I really see there's a lot of a teaching going to have to go on here.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to see how those dynamics played out in those families. But it's also this principle that, like, the design is that the next generation would go further than the previous.
Yeah.
Right?
It's always the design.
Like, the design is always that children would stand on the shoulders of their parents, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think that pushes this, too. And, of course, it's like there's this grief of, like, these people don't get to experience the fullness.
Is grief.
But yes, but then thinking about how do you then parent your children? How do you raise up the next generation? How do you prepare them to go where you couldn't? And that's, and I think that's where, like, the enemy likes to root in that bitterness of, like, well, I didn't get to, so I'm going to be bitter and angry about it. But instead it's like, but they can go further.
The joy of what's
So it's like, even think about, the multitude of children we have in this congregation. It's like I sit there and look at them and I'm like, I can't wait to see what they're doing. Think of all those teenagers and all their testimonies last week, and it's like I'm so, like, I think back to, like, my teenage years, and I'm like, I didn't have what they have. But I'm so glad that they have more than I did.
I'm invested in it. I am.
If you love somebody, you're supposed to want better for them
Right.
than you had.
Right, and it's like, let's push the narrative forward instead of being like, oh, I didn't get this because of this consequence. And yes, you can still grieve that. You can grieve your loss in your own life while still pushing forward the next generation. So Lord, we thank you that you don't give up on your people. We thank you that you give opportunities for restoration, for trust to be rebuilt. We thank you that you are just, that you are faithful, that you are slow to anger, abundant in loving kindness, that you do forgive iniquity and transgression, but you also don't leave the guilty unpunished, Lord. Lord, we just ask that your presence would be with us. We thank you for the way your character is revealed in the Torah, Lord. We thank you for the way that you build relationship with your people, and that you are unwavering in your faithfulness to them and to us and to those who will come after us, Lord. Yeshem Yeshua.